you had some hand in this development as well, correct?
Yes, and what they did then is just gave us the kind of boilerplate they've used in with agreements with Virgil and Hampshire and others. They didn't put a lot of specificity to us. They just used the boilerplate language with other communities.
It's not necessarily the language that I'm most concerned about, it's the line. It's where it actually
The
goes.
line, we were kind of looking at Plato anyway, but we want your feedback if you think it should be a different place on the map.
Go ahead, Trustee Millette.
First off, I'm really excited about this because I'm that kind of nerd, but I mean, this was part of the reason we incorporated, was to, a lot of the reason we incorporated was to have control of our borders, literally. And to, if I misspeak, please correct me, counsel or administrator. Even though Pingree's nowhere near this area at this time, if we come into this boundary agreement between essentially the two closest municipalities, we agree on this line, that gives us a, not preemptory, but it gives us a different standing legally than if it doesn't exist.
Yes.
That's true.
Okay, so to Trustee Munsey's point, as to the actual boundary right now, we got 4 roads. This one's pretty easy. You should look at the one between Schaumburg and Hoffman Estates for a really bizarre thing. They all violated it too, but there was lots of lawsuits back in those days. It was wild. Anyway, I mean, if we wanted to trade off, like if Burlington wants to go to the south side of Plato, we can go to the west side of Thomas, you know, or pick Ellithorpe. I think that's worth negotiation. Or if there's a different line we have in mind, let's have the discussion. This is really good to actually have this discussion. This is great. This is what you know, when we were the committee to incorporate, we were kind of nudged, Patsy and I and a couple others were kind of nudged to talk to the neighbors. If we were to become a village, where would we like to have boundary agreements? So we talked to the folks at Auburn at the time, and we actually talked to the folks at Burlington at the time. And this is ballpark what we were talking about. So it's only taken 17 years. No, how long have we now? Anyway, 14, whatever. But this is great. Yeah, I would say I'm in favor of bringing it for a more full discussion and to look at the actual verbiage.
Okay. Any more discussion? No, I think they've entered into a boundary agreement with Lily Lake, is what the president said.
They have one that they're considering at Lily Lake, and they entered a boundary agreement with Elton.
Yeah, which
So that
is rather
is
surprising.
because that
Yeah.
blocks that going west and then coming south.
Mm-hmm. So it's very preliminary, and if you have any suggestions, just let us know. Okay, we'll move on. 7B, presentation for establishment of user fees for the village, and Mark has you don't call it a PowerPoint anymore. What do you call it? Yeah.
In the nature of saving time, I don't think I need to go over. We went in the Cassell. Now that I have power, I should use the microphone.
There you go.
We went to the Cassell software and went back to where we have data entered into that software programming to 2016. So we've got, as you see in your packet, and folks at home, this will be on the village webpage tomorrow. The clerk will load it. But it shows all the revenues and the expenses going back those years. So the main ones, and I'll cover that in the next slides because I don't want to take all night. I'll shorten things a little bit. But when the village was formed, this is what the line looks. I don't know why it cuts out, but yeah, this is the main. Oh, it's good again? There we go. This is with just the local distributive fund, which is the sales tax share from the state, the income tax, you know, and that's what the village ran on primarily for since the inception of 2007. But you can see the expenses are going above that line, but that's where the smaller fees, whether it be Comcast, which is the largest, I don't know why it's doing that. It won't let me advance, like.
There you go. to get your finger out.
What the? Kim, why is it?
Oh, slow down.
I've never seen it do this
All right.
before.
Kim,
I'll just,
It was just in there.
I,
Kim will figure it out.
I'll bring it down this way this time and see if that makes it hold. There we go. Now I'll arrow up. That, it worked there. But your presence made the glitch go away. This reflects, and I hope folks in the audience can see that one, that the green line, when you add all the Comcast franchise fees, the permit fees, and fines from the police department, everything that's collected, then we stay in the black, and we've got enough room to maneuver to run our day-to-day operations and going forward. And you see that very big spike in cost going up, and that's reflective of some of the issues we had with personnel and legal matters the last 12 months. We don't project that that'll be a recurring expense. That was kind of a one-thing spike. So if we did increase these user fees, it'd be $150,000 estimate to the possibly high end of 200. It'd probably be closer to 150 because we're just doing the if you did 6% on the telecom tax and you pass the video streaming tax. User fee is what IDOR calls them. But for the public, they'll view it as a tax. And the balance in the short term, if you increase that, this is that graphically showing the cost that the village is facing on that pie chart that we've talked about the last couple meetings about the roads. And the roads are like a clock. They start out green, go to light green, then into the yellow category, and then ultimately orange, and then red, which is failing. So if you look at, and I did two scenarios, if the cost was at $250,000 a lane mile, how much we'd need to do on an annual basis, and then cumulatively out to the year 2043, we'd need almost $23 million in that time period. We know that we have $457,000 in MFT. You supplement that with whatever balance of funds that are generated from the annual operating budget, which is 100 to 150, into that, you get to 600, and then you've either taken 200 to 250 out of your fund balance to get a roughly $800,000 spend on roads in an average year, it looks like. But that's all dependent on how much money you take from the general fund reserves to supplement the MFT to get a kind of economy of scales of doing road work. And the other chart, which is very few roads you'll ever do at the $450,000 a lane mile. If you were doing that, you basically almost doubled how bad your outlay would look at $43 million when you are going to be doing never going to hit more than about $15 million at the rate that we're spending as revenues available. So any dollars, because your fund balance you could spend for another 6 to 7 years easily on 250 out of it to supplement your 600 that you have on an annualized basis to get to 800 to 850. You could do that for 6 or 7 years before you'd start coming up against your fund balance policy that you just approved off the tabling of your stabilization rules. And that's your financial pledge to keep 50% of your expenses in unencumbered fund balance. So you do have some runway to keep using that fund balance. And the other option is what the village did a couple years ago, where they didn't do a road project one year, built their 450 up to 900,000 available, and did a bigger project that year. Because You really do, I think, people in the industry will tell you, you want to be closer to $1 million than 500,000 to get economies of scale and to get active bidder interest in coming to work on your road project that you'd bid out. So in essence, the public need to know, the village started with a very sound plan on meeting the needs on an annualized basis, but it has never had a dedicated revenue source for capital needs, whether it be revisions and updates to the physical structure. You luckily only have one building, the one we're in, and the American Rescue dollars upgraded this, so you should be good in that capital need. You can project 15 to 20 years for the most part. But your road program has never had a dedicated fund of revenue. And most municipalities across America do have dedicated funds that are annually occurring going for your capital needs. That is the one chink in the Campton Hills armor that's always existed and will continue to exist because you don't have a property tax. And therefore, you have a lot of pressure on the local distributive fund and your franchise fees, for the most part, to run things. So this would just add the 150, which would help in your annual 457 in MFT. And then in the out years, if you have continued on this expense to, your LGDF is, reason it worked for 17 years, inflation was matching the rate of growth in the local distributive fund of around 3 to 3.5%. Since the pandemic, you're facing a 20% inflation factor. That has not fully hit to the village expenses in all cases, but there's a built-in 20%. So you do have the threat long-term if expenses and inflation is not brought into check nationally, it's way beyond your power. We do know the local distributive fund is flattening out and decreasing, and the state is not looking to add back into it. They will keep rating it when their funds are tight. So that is your primary driver of revenue, though, is the local distributive fund, and you're at the mercy of the state of Illinois. So questions?
First, trustee Millette was first, and then we'll go around.
Thank you, President Wojcicki. So my previous thought on this, I'm going to have to modify it a little bit. It looks like Comcast has been flat. I'm looking at these are what, 8-year projections?
Yes.
9 years.
It wasn't dropping off the table like we thought it was
But-
in February, because we got
yeah.
another payment, and that changed
But
that
AT&T
number.
has cratered.
It's
AT&T's
cratered,
cratered.
yes.
So, and that's a combination landline, but it's also AT&T Comcast, or AT&T Internet ISP. So we are losing, one of the, and Administrator Rooney, you are correct in saying we don't have a dedicated fund. It was always our hope that the utility tax fees would be the capital fund, as it is in many places, but we weren't sure at the beginning, where we wanted to be flexible so we can move funds to support the police functions, to support the building functions, et cetera. We kind of have always said we've got an extra amount of revenue we're going to siphon or we're going to dedicate to capital, right? So when we look at the target number, however, on what we want to seed to feed the capital fund, if we were to have a separate one, yes, you would dedicate, it's going to be this franchise fee, it's going to be this utilities tax fee, it's going to be RB, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing we can look at here is of the distributive fund, we've got this 24, you got 1.6. And if we're saying 1.6 covers police and it covers admin and stuff like that, then we could certainly look towards that goal of, okay, whatever we get out of these other fees are going to be dedicated to roads. I think that would be a strong message to the residents that, no, the reason we're doing this is because of this, and we're going to, the state years ago, I helped get the lockbox thing passed so that they stopped rating the road money for doing other things. So I think that would be one component of it for sure. Second component, maybe, yeah, we just go back down to the, you gotta get a better HDMI cable. Yeah, okay. The chart, and we have some new faces in the room and some old. The chart here is the same chart every other place is looking at in some variation. Where I work, it looks that way. In St. Charles, it looks that way. In Tavia, in Geneva, it all looks this way. There's not enough money to do roads at the rate that we should be doing them. So, you know, what we can gleam, glamour, you know, beg, borrow, and steal, to get into a more consistent, anticipated number for roads, I think is to our benefit. And as I think our last discussion, you know, these franchise fees, utility tax fees, there's a connection, and most places I've worked, the connection is, you know, those entities damage your roads, quote unquote. I mean, they'll be doing repairs. They only do the repairs they're required to do. That leaves you hanging, you know, holding the bag for other stuff. So when your resurfacing it's maybe a little bit more than it needed to be. It's not necessarily 100% correlation, but it seems to be understandable because it's consistent throughout northeastern Illinois and other parts of the country too. So we're not reinventing the wheel in that case. So when we think about going forward on, if we do think about going forward on the two, because I think we all ruled out places of eating. We said we weren't going to do that, I believe. Then keep that in mind as we look at the numbers, and then we'll face the folks and say, this is why we're doing this, and this is why we think we're doing it, or we don't.
Key, I guess, to reading the Finance Committee, they said that generally speaking, they know they take the MFT, whatever it is, 450, give or take any given year, and whatever balance remains on a year in surplus of all those revenues, whether it's 100,000 or 150, the idea is it goes to the road program for the next summer. And that's seemingly consistently what the village has been doing. And when that hasn't been adequate, there's been years where you didn't do a summer program, you saved your money and did it a 2-year revenue to do 1 year of expense of paving roads. And you're pretty well locked in to this year's 800,000+ with the concept of still to consider if you wanted to do some of that rejuvenation of another 60 or 70. We haven't, you know, gotten a lot of feedback from you on that. But that was coming at the cost of moving 250 out of the fund balance to get to that big number for this year. And next year, if all 3 of the roads through the KDOT bypass come into fruition at that more expensive standard they're going to be worked on, that our 25% cost is roughly $1 million that we're looking at next year. So that's going to put some strain on the fund balance next year.
Carmen, go ahead.
I just had just a couple clarifications. I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, but in speaking with my partner, Michelle, and in listening to the video, I just wanted to clear up a couple things that were discussed since I had worked on the proposed ordinances. So there are certain taxes that are administered by IRDOR, certain taxes that are administered by, self-administered by a municipality, and that's just across the board. What is up for consideration or review, you have places of eating, telecommunications, and amusement or streaming. Out of those 3, the only one administered by IDOR would be the telecommunications tax. Places of eating and amusement or streaming would be administered by the village. So those, the vendors that are the tax applies to would have to register as collectors, quote unquote, and then remit those taxes to the village directly. For telecom, that is handled completely through IDOR. It's collected by IDOR, and it's then remitted to the village. So The communications that I've had with IDOR with regard to any of these taxes were just limited to what kind of information the IDOR could give the village with regard to sales or service tax, essentially ST1 information that that the village should be able to get under the reciprocal agreement that you approved at the last meeting. I also provided what would be a draft copy of the telecom ordinance because it's extremely technical and IDOR has to approve that one. I wanted them to provide any potential deficiencies, if there were any, before it was considered for approval. So if anybody has any questions on that, let me know. It seemed like there was some discussion on some of those issues last time and some confusion. So.
Thank you, Carmen. Trustee McKelvey?
Yeah, I just want to, actually, Mike mentioned it and emphasized it, and I want to underscore it as well. And that is, I think that this tax or fee, but it's a tax, I think we have to specify, I don't know if it can be done in what it's called, but it has to be used only for roads. I don't want to have any room there that we're going to somehow move it somewhere else, because I think if I'm someone out there in the village using it, I know, they know our roads are not that good. They know at least if they're going to pay that, it's going to the roads. So I think however we can, bootstrap that onto this ordinance or specify how those monies are to be spent if it was indeed passed, as long as it says that, then I think it makes it a whole lot easier.
Yes, I mean, there are no restrictions in any of the statutory references that allow for these taxes as to where the money could be used. And what I would suggest would be in the ordinances themselves, have an indication of the need for additional revenue sources to supplement certain line items. Whether you were considering this go for supporting road maintenance or police services or whatever it might be, put that in the ordinance. I mean, the village code provision that will include the language requiring the remittance of the tax, the administrative procedures, it probably wouldn't go there, but you could adopt a policy also that includes, where these funds would go. And then, of course, when budget time comes around next year, you'd include it in that discussion.
And it'd be that ordinance that you have as the stabilization ordinance that was established way back when. It's basically your financial fund balance policy. You could just add, if these are passed, these two fees, taxes, the revenues will be by our fund balance policy dedicated to road program maintenance.
Sure, that could come in the future if you have it. If you have the tax in place for a year, say 2 years, and you determine what the average amount is going to be collected, then you could amend that policy to include set aside for that.
Okay, Trustee Muncy, go ahead.
Thank you, President Winnicky. Yeah, I said it in the last meeting, repeat it again, although it's been said twice now, these need to be for roads only. I had suggested in the last meeting in the whereases, where in both ordinances, the whereas says it's for the general good of the public or whatever, it's something pretty ambiguous, that it say it be for the roads, and then if something needs to be a little more toothy than that, to have more teeth in it somewhere else, then that's fine. I defer to the village council for that, but it needs to be locked in for roads if we're going to do this. I would not want it spent by this board or any future boards somewhere else.
The best place to do that would be to amend your fund balance policies, which is in this village called your stabilization requirements. And then it's in your financial policies, and it's harder to amend.
Okay, one more question, one more comment, please. The question is, I had asked it last meeting, the answer I received was on the streaming or amusement tax, is that the resident, the user, would not pay this, that it would be the provider that would pay that tax. So the Netflix, the Hulu, the whatever streamer, the service would pay it, not the resident. It was answered quickly and then not reiterated or anything. I want to make sure that that's clear to everyone, that on the record, as we understand it, the resident, the user, would not pay that tax. It would be the provider.
The provider, they don't have a one-size-fits-all. Most of them come as a bundled price because they advertise, whether it be Hulu or Amazon Prime, $15.99. That's the price they charge in the Metro Chicago advertisement rate. And that's whatever villages or cities have taxes or fees attached, it comes out of that dollar amount. But there are service providers, because they've been hit by every town across the metro, area, some of them have added a tax per the village or the city of 79 cents or $2.50 onto the bill. So it's not a universal. I thought it was 100%. Everybody treated it with their bundle price. Some of the providers have reacted to, especially high-cost areas like Chicago and Washington, D.C., New York. They've added whatever the fee is to the bill, much like you would see on your telecom tax.
Okay, thanks for
Not all, but
the
some.
additional information.
Yeah.
Right.
Last thing was the comment, I guess that's actually another question. We had approved the ability to communicate with IDOR in our last meeting to get a more detailed revenue estimate. Sounds like tonight that would only be for the telecommunications tax. That's the only thing they would have estimates for. When would we expect to get that more detailed revenue estimate beyond what we've verbally heard tonight?
We're preparing the, excuse me, the executed documents to send to IDOR. They need quite a bit in addition to the agreement. They have to have lists of individuals from the village that can have access to the village, to the information. And it's not just telecom. So in its basic terms, it is telecom, but when I spoke with the IDOR representative regarding the agreement, they indicated that if the village would be consider any type of additional tax in the future, they can potentially work with the village to provide more information, because that's the whole question of, well, how do you know how much the village would recover from a certain tax if you don't know what type of revenue is out there? And apparently it's something that IDOR does quite a bit. So they could give you access to, for instance, sales tax or service occupation tax potential revenue that the state receives, then that could be passed through to the village in a multitude of different areas. So you could then take subsets of the information that they provide you and compare it to what type of tax that would be applicable just to certain businesses. So, and just to follow up on what Administrator Rooney said about the additional fee added to a streaming service, we can't say that a vendor is not going to change that policy, like a Netflix or a Hulu or anything like that. There are certain states that statewide they do have a tax on amusement or streaming, and I think it was Netflix does charge in those states. They may not pass it on to the user. They may pass it on to the user. That would be up to the vendor. But at the end of the day, it's the vendor that's the one that's collecting it. So it would be up to them.
So just to answer the question, I mean, I understand IDOR can do more for us in the future, but right now, it's specific to the telecommunications tax. When would we expect to have that estimate? It doesn't sound like it would be by our next meeting.
It might be. I mean, it just depends on how quickly IDOR moves, and I don't know if you've ever worked with IDOR. They're not always very quick. They have gotten back to me pretty quickly when I reached out to them. I mean, within a day or two. So if we provide them the information this week, I would hope that we could at least have a verification that they have it, and then when they can provide the village access. And the access will come into the village's My Tax account that would be accessible by whoever the village selects. We expect the finance director, probably the administrator.
Yeah, they put a pretty tight lockbox on that because you would be able to see the exact sales gross receipts of any business, and you got to be very respectful and proprietary because you wouldn't want that to get out.
Right. I mean, the finance director could certainly look at that information, and if the village is considering, an XYZ tax, can determine based on that percentage what estimated revenue the village would receive, and then prepare a report. But the director would not be able to include any identifying information.
We just need a number, that's fine.
And
Yeah, I
so
don't-
that's so.
Yeah,
yeah.
you don't want it to be Acme versus Baker.
Okay, any more? Nick, go ahead.
You know, I'm having a hard time with all of these taxes, and the reason is we've kind of looked at everything that we could and come up with these 3 different user fees, and it's not going to change this graph. I mean, we can have these user fees, and we're still gonna have, I mean, $150,000 a year it's not gonna change, you know, the condition of our road work data. The telecommunications tax right now in Illinois, it's like 28 or 29%, and then we're gonna add another 3 to 6% to that. It's gonna be like the highest in the nation. It already is. You know, median home values in our town are great, but we can't put ourselves in all of our individual residents' situations. The economy's not great. Groceries are through the roof. I just don't feel like we're getting the value out of any of these taxes. You know, this is not going to pivot this roadwork chart, however you end up looking at it. I think there's some other more creative ways. I mean, when we're in a situation where we have X amount of money and we don't have these taxes, I mean, we talked about a biannual road work. You know, I was thinking about an intergovernmental, some sort of an agreement with Elburn or the towns around us. I mean, where we had a single contract and we put all of our road work together. I mean, this stuff is all more work, but nobody's talking about these, you know, more creative, think outside the box solutions. I brought up different types of road work. You know, there are alternative means to what we're looking at right now. I know that they don't all apply, but the more time that goes by, the more ideas come up on ways where you could easily pick up $150,000 without nickel and diming on user fees. So I just can't see the value in doing this. So that's what I need to see still.
Trustee Muncy, and then Trustee Millett after.
Thank you, President Winnicke. I have not seen anything yet that is an idea where you could easily pick up $150,000. It has not been presented to us. There's been some ideas floated around. Trustee Boatner has some creative ideas as well. However, in this case, this gets us annually, this additional revenue could potentially get us to that $1 million, which is what we wanted to have, as really about half of what we really want to spend, but what we want to have to go out to contractors and say, look, we've got $1 million program every year. We will get better pricing, we'll get better coverage, we'll have more contractors interested, so we will potentially be able to do more roads. So that's a benefit of what some people might say is a drop in the bucket compared to the program, but honestly, we have to make hard decisions and scratch and claw and try to figure out how do we solve this. If I can't bite the whole thing in one bite, I have to at least try to get there somehow. And I think getting to the $1 million and having a better program every year to get better pricing and get more coverage is a good first step to doing that. There will be future steps potentially needed. I don't know what those will be in the future, but we have to do something rather than just kicking the can down the road.
Trustee Millett, go ahead.
Thank you, President Winnicke. That's always the dichotomy, I guess it's a dichotomy, yeah, in my mind too, is, you know, when is something de minimis? You know, when is it not worth the effort it would take to get it? And I think we're so limited on what's available to us. I mean, on one hand, I could see where like, oh, it's not even worth it, but we don't have much other choice. I mean, to your point, and look at it different ways, is the economy crappy? In some ways it is, but the Dow hit 40,000 last week. But we can't touch that, right? So we have to look at what our challenges are and how much we pay contractors that buy asphalt. And labor's been ascendant. So, I mean, a lot of what we see are our labor costs have increased. We can't, you know, where we are, we're limited on any of that bigger picture stuff. We're just victims like everybody else in that sense. But when I was looking at, we've lost $40,000 in one franchise fee already. It'd be nice to at least recover that, because the delta we're now looking at right, is 40,000 less than it had been when we were before. So, you know, at a bare minimum, play a little defense. You're right, we're never going to get that number. We will, there's no conceivable way, there's not the money out there for every community, plus the state, plus the township, plus the counties, to get roads back up. We're just going to have to accept it. And I think in many ways we have accepted, you know, what level of maintenance we have for various things in society. And then it gets into a crisis, bridges start falling down and people react and feds throw out money and, you know, it sucks, but that's what it is. So when we look at what I don't want to be combative to the point, but I'm thinking that this is something we can have a direct control over. This is something we can lockbox into our road network, our road maintenance program. And then, you know, at least we can do as much as we possibly can. To your point, Trustee Boner, there could be intergovernmental agreements. I know there's cooperative purchasing and such that DuPage has for certain things. We could certainly investigate that. Because then again, if it saves us 3% on our cost for roads, whereas that may be nothing to a Schaumburg, that's something to us. So yeah, that's a valid point, something to look at too.
All right, any other discussion? Okay, sure,
You know,
go
Mike,
ahead.
we had
Trustee
discussed the
Muncy.
possibility of having an increased period of time before the next meeting for public comment. Don't know if that's still something we're considering or not.
I think the idea was that before we would pass any user fee increase of any kind, that we'd have an extended, at that meeting, whether it be for June or the one in July, we would put on the agenda to have a longer public comment period, and
Oh,
maybe
okay.
not limit people to 3 minutes, give them 5 or 7 or some number that they could make their case.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be a rule you guys could establish yourselves, though.
Mm-hmm. Trustee McKelvey? Go ahead.
We could start the meeting early, the next meeting,
True.
whether that's an hour or 30 minutes or 45, I mean, it doesn't matter, maybe
Okay.
6 o'clock and open it up to public comments. I think that would be,
That's a good idea.
I mean, rather than, you know, push it up, because we're only having, what, one meeting a month now, starting in June, is that correct? Okay, yeah. So
June,
we're at-
July, and August,
Pardon me, yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think if 6 o'clock, that would be
Mm-hmm,
more than enough time to let people have their say.
mm-hmm. Okay, it's 8:30, we have closed session, we wanna, okay.
We can make that very quickly for folks. We're not gonna take any action after the executive session.
Right.
The public didn't have to stick around.
So I'll take a motion to go into closed session, and this is to discuss security procedures related to the village and litigation, and we will not return to open session after closed session.
I so move.
Okay, moved by McKelvey, second by? Muncy. Roll call?
Trustee McGelvey? Aye. Trustee Muncy? Aye. Trustee Boatner? Aye. Trustee Millet?
Okay, motion passes.